It's hard to believe it's November of 2022, which means that 2023 is just around the corner, and that's crazy to even say, isn't it? So we are winding down our not something to believe in, that was what we did in the spring. We're winding down our Tell Me Something Good series, talking about Old Testament classic stories, and today we're going to talk about Esther, and it's called For Such a Time as This. And the main idea is simply that those who are following Christ should always be ready, should always be prepared for God to use them in incredible opportunities. The book of Esther is an amazing book. It reads like a beautiful story, a novel. It has rags to riches. It has heroes and villains. It has romance. It's action-packed. It's filled with intrigue and suspense and drama and gratitude and bravery and all these different things. Intrigue, you name it. Esther is this beautiful Jewish girl being raised by her cousin, and he helps guide her and helps her see her place and helps her see how God can use her. His name is Mordecai. And it illustrates how God can use anyone for his plans and how we can fight our fears and bring glory to God ultimately. So let's talk about how Esther enters the picture. In Esther chapter 1, Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus, was the king, and he held a feast, this long feast, showing off his wealth, showing off everything that he had, all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of it, there was another 7-day feast that he held, and his wife Vashti held one on the other side. And in the end, it says he was feeling good from the wine. It says he commanded them to bring Queen Vashti before him with her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials because she was very beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. The king became furious and his anger burned within him. The king consulted the wise men, etc., etc., etc. What should I do with her? And basically, she's deposed. She's dethroned. She's taken down from being the queen. So King Xerxes angrily banishes his queen for disobedience. Vashti was the wife, the queen. Xerxes threw the 6-month party, and then a 7-day one after that, 7-day banquet after that, and Vashti threw one at the same time. Drunk with wine, he asks her, or commands her, to come show off her beauty. She refuses, and probably what was going on here was he was wanting her to show off her nude body in front of the other people. We don't know that for sure, but that's always kind of what I've believed. She refused, and he consults this man, and they say they have to punish her. He has to punish her. So to make an example so that all the women can't, disobey their men and so forth. She's dethroned in an attempt to enhance men's positions compared to women's in the society. So a beauty pageant in chapter 2 is held. There's an opening for queen. They hold a contest. They bring in young women, young virgins, give them beauty treatments for a long period of time. And Esther, who is an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, her parents have died, she wins everyone's favor and ultimately wins the king's favor and is chosen as the next queen. She's given the crown. She's given the position that Vashti had held. But along the way, she kept her Jewish background secret. She had a secret. She was a Jew. The king didn't know it. Mordecai advised her not to tell, so to protect her, they kept it a secret. Nobody knew that, and they didn't really even know her connection to Mordecai. So that's kind of how she enters the picture. The story of Esther has a lot to do with God orchestrating plans. The first thing that happens is in chapter 2, 21 through 23. The king and his counselors approved the proposal. He followed Memucan's advice. He said, I'm in the wrong chapter, sorry. Chapter 2 here. During those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, became infuriated and planned to assassinate the king. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to Queen Esther, and she told the king on Mordecai's behalf. The report was investigated and verified, and both men were hanged on the gallows. The event was recorded in the historical record in the king's presence. So he's sitting at the gate, he hears 2 guards plotting to assassinate the king. He tells Esther, she tells the king, they investigate it turns out to be true. Later down the line, in a later chapter, the king can't sleep, and he's reading the Chronicles, which was mentioned at the very end of that. He's reading the Chronicles and realizes that nothing has been done for Mordecai to honor him. So he asks Haman, his second in command, what he should do. Well, Haman comes up with this great plan, thinking it's him that the king's wanting to honor, only to find out it was his enemy, Mordecai, not Haman himself. It's sweet irony when Haman is asked to be the one to honor him. So the next thing about God orchestrating his plans, Mordecai also finds out about Haman's conspiracy to kill all the Jews. Haman did not like the Jews, and he blamed everything on them, and so he comes up with this plan, convinces the king the Jews are the problem, and Mordecai hangs around the palace, hears Haman's plans, and when he hears about it, he's upset. It says he tears his clothing. And ultimately he goes and communicates it to Esther and tells her she needs to do something about it. And she's intimidated a little bit because it's a risk that she's going to have to take. But chapter 4, verse 14 has the key verse in the book of Esther. Who knows but that you have come to this royal position for such a time as this. God's orchestrating plans behind the scenes. If Esther hadn't been in this situation, what would have occurred? What would have happened to the Jewish people? What would have happened to her? So she sends word to Mordecai to have the Jewish people pray and fast for 3 days. Then she would go to the king, and she would risk her life before him. Later, Mordecai wouldn't bow to or respect Haman, and Haman plots and kills him. So God's working behind the scene through all of this. The third thing about God orchestrating the circumstances, Esther bravely goes before the king to save the Jewish people. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. On the third day, Esther, dressed in royal clothing, stood in the inner courtyard of the palace facing it. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the courtroom facing the entrance. As soon as he saw Esther standing in the courtyard, she gained favor in his eyes. The king extended the scepter in his hand toward Esther, and she approached and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked. "Whatever you want, even half of the kingdom, it will be given to you. If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared." The king said, "Hurry, get Haman so we can do as Esther has requested." The king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. While drinking the wine, the king asked Esther, "Whatever you ask will be given to you." She said, "This is my petition and request. If I have found favor, if it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come to the banquet I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will do what the king has asked." And then in chapter 7, that second feast actually happens. The king asks Esther, "Whatever you want, whatever you seek, even up to half the kingdom." She said, "If I've found favor in your eyes, spare my life. This is my request, and spare my people. For my people and I have been sold to destruction, death, and extermination." Anyway, she tells him what's going on. He says, "Who is this? Where's the one who would devise such a scheme?" Esther answers, "The adversary and enemy is this evil Haman." Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king arose in anger, went to the palace garden. Haman begged for his life. As the king returns, Haman's falling on the couch where Esther's reclining. The king exclaims, "Would he actually violate the queen while I'm in the house?" As soon as the statement left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harbona said, "There's a gallows 75 feet tall at Haman's house he made for Mordecai, who gave the report that saved the king." The king said, "Hang Haman on it." They hanged Haman on the gallows he prepared for Mordecai. The king's anger subsided. And so then she saves the people, basically. Anyone who went to the king uninvited, unannounced, was at the mercy of the king's mood. They risked death just for showing up, for something as simple as that. So she has the courage to go do it, and he gives her favor, invites her in, tells her, "I'll give you up to half the kingdom." She invites him to a banquet, then another the next day. Ultimately, she reveals Haman's plan. The king is upset. Haman is killed, and the Jewish people are saved. So what can we learn from the story of Esther? First thing is this: God has an incredible plan for my life. Esther had a lot of things happen in her life that were probably not part of her plan. Losing her family early, being raised by a cousin, being dragged into this banquet, being made the queen, having to go before the king. All these things probably were not in her plans. Nothing surprises God. He has a plan for our lives, even through crazy circumstances. She never dreamed she'd face this life and death decision. God knows the plans he has for us. He has a purpose even in our pain. Isaiah reminds us that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. They're higher. They're beyond ours. Second thing, God is in control, and he's always working behind the scenes. We've already seen that. We've already talked about that. Even when it seems like things look bleak, God knew what he was doing. He's at work behind the scenes. Esther's the only book that God is not specifically mentioned in, but his fingerprints are all over it. Nothing in her life, nothing that happens here is a coincidence. Nothing is happenstance. God's arranging every detail for his glory. God is sovereign. His fingerprints are all over our lives, just like they were for her. And wherever God's placed you is where he wants you at this moment. And that's the third thing. God has me right here, right now for a reason. Mordecai encouraged her to go, beg for mercy, plead before the king. She risked death either way, really. And then he said, "Who knows but that God has put you here for such a time as this?" Well, he didn't say God, but that you're here for such a time as this. God had put her there for a reason, just like he has all of us. The last thing that I want us to learn from Esther is this: who we surround ourselves with matters. Surround yourself with wise people. 1 Corinthians says, bad company corrupts good character. We're always influenced by those around us. Xerxes got bad advice from the people he listened to in the beginning, and then from Haman and so forth. Esther listened to her relatives. She listened to the people around her. She spent some time in prayer and fasting. She listened to the right voices, and we need to do the same. Who we listen to, who we surround ourselves with matters. God was at work behind the scenes, orchestrating, helping Esther. whatever may be going on, we know that God is the same with us. He knows about it. He works behind the scenes. He has us here for a reason. And we need to learn to be like Esther, to continue doing the right things, following God, listening to the right voices, not that of others around us. We're right where we are, right where we need to be, right for this time, for such a time as this.